Hello and welcome back to the Building a Blog series. This is part 15. So in this tutorial, we're going to have a look at building a comment system with AJAX. So whereas before we had the comment system whereby we had to make a comment and then the page would refresh, here we got now the option with AJAX of creating an instant message that's going to appear within our list without having to refresh the page. So this tutorial, although it's fairly long, isn't a complete guide on how to do this because there is a lot of front-end work that needs to be done. I'm going to show you and take you through some of the processes and some of the different aspects of building a comment system that you're going to need to think about in terms of the front end. And we will implement most of it, but there'll be small things left that you'll need to implement, for example, maybe just a little bit of styling. And then maybe you've got some additional features you want to add, but hopefully by the end of this tutorial, you'll feel comfortable in adding those extra facilities that you want. So here you can see we're going to have a comment system. We're going to implement it so that we can now identify from the users that are logged in who can access the comment system only what user has actually typed in the comment. So that's the first thing. Then we add their profile. We can go ahead and, for example, allow the user who has made the comment to delete their comment if we want, and then they can go ahead and reply to any other comment they wish. So we're still utilizing MPTT, so we still have all the different levels and we've got still 3 layers, so we can reply I think up to 3 times, or we can have 3 layers. Notice here that the way this is implemented, that the message will appear in the list, and then when we refresh it will just get established. You can see it then goes into a different styling, so it just needs a little bit of styling there to get that working, so that when you press reply and submit, it just styles it properly. But you can easily add that. The styling is in place. We may even cover it if we've got time. Okay, so you can see the type of things that we're going to now implement. This is really the next stage of a comment system. So just to take you back to the Building the Blog series, sorry to harp on here, but I just want you to fully understand where we're going with this. So in the third part of the series, or the second part in actual fact, we created a simple blog comment feature. So the idea is to build your knowledge up from the ground up. So here we built a very simple blog feature. And then we moved on in part 5 to build the MPTT comment system. So we utilized MPTT to create a layered type of comment system. It didn't really have all the features that we needed, but it started to bridge some of the gaps that were missing in the first part of the comment tutorial. So now in this tutorial, we're now going to just move that forward slightly and, like I said, import or include AJAX and just take the comment system to the next level. So we'll definitely be revisiting the comments feature in future tutorials, because I'm thinking maybe we need to implement some sort of thumbs up rating system where we can upvote different comments in the comments section, for example. So there's loads of different features that we could include, and like I said, we'll definitely include them in later tutorials. So in this tutorial, we're not starting from scratch. We are using the series or part 14 repository. So you can definitely go ahead and download that and start as I am with part 14. If you load it all up, remember that we need all these requirements if you haven't got a virtual environment installed, etc. So you just need to get the package working. There is a video showing you how to get the packages working and installed, etc. from the requirements file. So this is what it looks like at the moment without all the AJAX comment system in place. We had just a bog standard comment system. We made a comment and it would appear right there. So we're going to work from here, and we're now going to build up this into the AJAX comment system that I just shown you. Okay, so let's first of all start off with going into the blog, and we're going to change the model around slightly. So if we look for the comments model, we can see that we're using MPTT model, and we've got the post, which is a foreign key. So that just identifies the comment to the post type. Or sorry, it matches the comment with the post. So we know what comments are referring to what post or related to what post. We have then the name and the email So we probably don't need to ask for a name anymore, so we can get rid of this. So the idea here is our comment system, like you would see many different comment systems, you would have to be actually logged in to make a comment. So we don't need to now ask the user for a name, and we definitely don't need to ask them for an email. So we definitely don't need that. So we've got post, we've got the parent, which is related to the MPTT model. So here we're going to be able to make our levels. So we've got the content, the published, and the status. So obviously what we want to do now is associate comments to users as well as the post. So here we go with another kind of foreign key. So let's make a foreign key between the comments and the author, which is going to be utilized or it's going to be taken from the users table. So here we're just connecting the users table to a new field called author, so that we can identify who has actually made the comment. Okay, so let's just go ahead and remove this dunder method here. We won't need that just for now. And then go ahead and just make your migrations. So you can see that we already have an error here. So in actual fact, we can't really make the migrations yet until we tidy up things. So remember that our model is connected to our forms. So we need to go into the form and we just need to remove any previous fields that we don't want to use anymore. So we're going to get rid of that and the name. And then we can just remove reference to it within the widgets. And that should be sufficient there. So I'll go ahead and make migrations and then migrate. Okay, so now we have our new table in place, and hopefully you understand what's going on here. So we just removed those items we didn't need, and we just added the author field, which is connected to the users, so that we can identify which user has made the comment. So now we make a few amendments in the form. So what we want to do now in the class meta here is add the fields post, because what we want to do is collect from the user when they actually type in a comment. We need to know what post they're making a comment on. We need to know the parent. So the parent is referring here to the MPTT technology, so that we can identify whether it's going to be part of a new level. So whether we need to make a new level or whether it's on the whether it's a new comment. So we're using MPTT to kind of sort out those levels of comments. So we need to know what level it is. And then we had the content, which is obviously just the content. So we want to pass those three things in from the form to the view. So we don't also here include the author. Remember, this is a mandatory field. We made a foreign key here. So when we submit a comment, we must have the author. So the reason why it's not in the form is because it's not something that we need to pass from the actual template. So we can pick up the user ID from the view by the fact that it's passed through the request. So we don't need to add that into our form. Okay, so apologies. You've probably seen so far that you also have seen the previous tutorial ready to follow this. This isn't a complete kind of step-by-step guide here. We're just really reformatting the code here to make it work in this new situation. So let's just toggle that. So this is the view. So far we had in the previous, we had this pagination system in place. So we're just going to remove it for now and possibly add it a bit later on. So we're going to slim this down. So we're going to keep the posts. So we want to obviously identify what post we're referring to when we're actually adding the comment. So we then keep this, the favorite. So this was just to do with the heart system here. So the reason why this code is here for the heart rating system. And then we got all comments equals post. So obviously we've collected all the comments, so status equals true. So that's how we're returning the comments. And then we have all this pagination system. So let's just get rid of some of this pagination system here. User comment equals none, so I don't need that. Okay. So, and here you can see that we've got this if statement. So if request equals post. So previously we were posting the new user comments via post, and then we're performing this action here. So you can see that we collected the information and then we restructured the data and then saved the data finally into the database. And then we redirected the user back to that page using the post slug. So let's just get rid of all that for now, because we're going to make a new class. Or a new view. So we'll keep the comments form because we do want to show the comment form. Remember, this is the post single. So when someone actually goes to a new single page, this will be initiated, which obviously we want the comment form to be initiated and all the heart rating, etc., on the post single page. So now we've kind of removed things here. You can see the items that need to be removed. We'll keep the post, the comment. We don't need this, the comments now. So let's just keep the comment form. So we don't need that. So we're going to keep the comment form because that's the comment form here that we're passing back. All comments we need, and then the fab for the heart rating. So that's all now in place. We're still using the blog single template. So let's make a new view. Apologies, I thought I was making a class, but looking at my code here, I didn't in the end. So here we had add comment. So here is going to be a new view where we're going to capture the AJAX request. So when we create a new comment, that's going to form a new AJAX request, and it's going to be sent to this view here, and we're going to capture it using the if. So if request method equals post. So this is where we stop, and now we're going to go into the template and make some edits in the template, set up some AJAX so we can pass some data across into our view, and then obviously return data. Okay, so into the single template in the blog templates here, this is where we're going to make some changes to include some AJAX now. So what we want to do, like I said, is the user types in a new message, sends make comment or create comment, and then that's going to fire off a AJAX request to the server. Okay, so have a look at this base code. So let's just think what's happening here. So on our page, we have a comments form. And you've seen that when we make a new comment, we can click, I'm not sure if it's going to work now. When we make a new comment, you saw in the example that we had to bring up a new form. So if you've used or gone over the previous tutorial, the MPTT tutorial, you can see that when we add comments, we can obviously reply directly to different comments, and that creates different levels of comments. So there's two different forms here. So we need to provide a way of capturing the information from the two forms. So this is just an example of having the ability to utilize or have two forms on the same page. So you can see here that what we're doing is we're capturing a click. So the document, this document on click, and here we've set up two IDs. So new comment and new comment inner. So the new comment is a fresh new comment that we're going to make, and the new comment inner is an ID that's going to be placed in the form which appears when you want to reply to a comment. So what we do is we capture that, or those click events on those two IDs, and then we bring it in. So here what we're going to do is we're going to get the value of the button. So each button on the new comment and new comment inner, they're going to have different IDs. So to identify which form we want to deal with and collect the data from, we put a value in the button, which we can then pass into this AJAX here. And then we can determine and capture the data from that specific form. So if you've seen the other tutorials, you've probably seen that when we set up our data, we set up individual components. I think in the previous tutorials, we captured data right here, the values of the data, then we passed it into the data. So here what we're doing is we're actually capturing the whole form. So we identify the form based upon the button ID here, and we capture the whole form. So we then serialize that data and then make it available so we can push it across to our view. And that just simplifies the process of having to select and tell AJAX to send individual components, and it also allows us to easily check our form if it's valid or not. Because if we just send across individual pieces of data, then we can't necessarily easily put it through the validation in the form like we can do if we work this way. So this is the boilerplate then that we're going to be utilizing. Here you can see that this is the AJAX component right here. We're going to send this data off via post. This is the URL that we're going to send it to, so blog add comment. So we're going to need to add that shortly. That's obviously going to be connected to the view that we've just made. The data here, so we're setting up an ID, so hashtag and then plus the button, so the value that we return from the button that's pressed. Now, just to add complication here, this data here. So what we want to do really here is we want to pass in the form. So really what we want to do here is pass in the form. So if we did this, the problem is that it doesn't specify which form we want to collect. So if you've got two forms on your page, then it might select the wrong data. So what we're trying to do is add an ID to the form, which we'll do shortly, and that ID is actually going to match the button ID as well. So what's happening, the button's going to have a value which is the same value as the ID of the form. So here in actual fact we're just collecting the ID of the form and serializing the form data. I apologize, this is very wordy without really showing you something. I just wanted to explain it first. I'll try and set the scaffolding here, and I'll try and match this all up for you shortly. So let's just go ahead and create this URL. So it's in the blog, add comments. So we'll just go ahead and add that in. So this is going to be a really simple path, as you imagine. So we could probably get rid of, if there was an old one. Okay, so let's just add the new one. So add comment slash connected to our views, add comment, name add comment. So that just connects the AJAX to the path to the view. So back in the single template here in the blog templates, this is the previous form that we had. So it was called my form method post, and we were just generating all the labels and inputs automatically using P to kind of separate the different elements. So we're just going to change that now, and we're going to create this form manually. So I've made a few changes to the styling, so let me just explain this. Here's the form. So we give it the ID of comment form, class comment form, in case we need to kind of capture or utilize the styling at all. So we've got an ID and a class. So let's just remember, if you're not familiar here, the ID can only be utilized once on the page. So it's meant to be a unique identifier for a single element, whereas a class can be utilized multiple times. That's important to remember if you're not familiar with that. Method equals post. So here we have the CSRF token as per normal. And what I've done here in this with here, this simple loop, you can see that I've just outputted the total comments. This is where I'm now going to be placed. This is where I'm now placing that. So that's all that code does there. So here what we have is a select. So I've manually created the select for the ID post. So I want to make sure that when I pass the data from my form via AJAX to the view, that it has the post ID. So if I were just to auto generate the form and then just let the form generate itself, there'd be no way for me to actually capture easily the post ID. So I manually make this option here, and you see that I've hidden it using dnone. So this is a bootstrap class. This hides it, so you won't actually see this, but it'll be in the background. So when you submit this form, this data will be sent off, which is the post ID. So every time you go to a different single page, every time you go to a different post, this is obviously going to represent that individual post. So this is how we're going to capture in the database what comment is associated to what post by passing over the post ID in this select option field, which correlates to the form here post. Okay, so we've got that first. Then we have this label, which is going to be for the parent. So again, what you're going to find here is that we've got this comment. So I've manually created this parent. So this is for the, going back here, this is for the parent. So this is the MPTT information, and to determine whether this comment is part of a new level, or what level this is part of or associated to. So remember, this is for each level, a different number is provided, and MPTT sorts out which level it's then meant to be in. So we can identify if this is associated to any additional or existing comment. So here, in actual fact, I've actually hidden it this way this time. So I've utilized this piece of code here like I did previously. In actual fact, I've used the class D, I've injected that into the page, and you can see that we're not actually going to be utilizing this in this section. So we will need it for the comment that we make when we reply to someone. We're going to need this information, but for this page here, for this form, this is just a simple form for making a new comment. So in actual fact, we just don't need anything there. We don't need to assign anything in this information. Okay, so then I've gone ahead and just created this deflex. So this is just going to just create some different formatting here. We've got the avatar URL. So we're going to get the avatar for the user that's currently logged in, so we can see the avatar. So have a look at this code and how that's actually done. And then we've got the actual comment form, so the content, and that's just the box where the user can type in information. So at the bottom here, you can see that we've created a button, and this button has the value of comment form and the ID of new comment, which is the same as not. So it's got an ID of new comment. So important is that value is the same as the ID, because remember what's going to happen here is we're going to pass in the value, so the button value, that's where we're going to capture it, and then we're going to place it right here. And this is where we actually identify what form we want to utilize, which form's data we want to utilize to send across to the server. So that's how it's connected up. Hopefully that makes sense. So you can probably see that we're spending a lot of time with Java here in the front end to do and to organize all this different functionality. In actual fact, the back end is really a simple process. Django part is really easy. This is all really focused on front end. And I wanted to give you a working example because I wanted to focus on the Django really here. So this code can definitely be reformatted and refactored. If you're a bit more familiar with JavaScript, maybe you can utilize this and bring in a React module here or component to handle this more effectively. Of course, that's something we'll look at in a future tutorial. Okay, so now we have the functionality, hopefully, where we can type in a comment. When we submit, we're going to capture that submission because we're using the ID of new comment, which is the same as this one here. No. So the ID, is new comment. So when we press the button on click is new comment, and that's how we're capturing the new comment right there. And then we pass this in and we capture the value of the button, and then we use the value to capture the actual forms data that we want to collect and send across. So now we can go back into the view and just handle this data. Okay, so this is where we've got to. We've added the if request method post. So remember that we are sending via post here, so type post. So what's going to happen is that we're going to send via the URL to this view, and we're going to capture the fact that we've sent an if post. Now you won't see me here. We could send a return back. In actual fact, I always leave that out. You can definitely just include something there. So let's continue here. So if we do receive a post, then we need to do something. So let's first of all, let's just take the comment form that we send across. Remember, we are sending a comment form across. If you want to actually see the data that you're sending across, well, you could just use a print, for example, and you could print the request. So everything's stored in the request and then post. So if you were to run this, the information sent across would appear in the terminal. If you're not too familiar with print or not used print before, that's definitely a good way of trying to troubleshoot your system. sorry to reiterate, I thought it was an interesting, useful component or part to reiterate. So use print to determine what's coming back, what data is coming back. Because like I said, if you use print here and this system up to here is working, it will print out what's being returned. And that's just a good way of troubleshooting what data is being returned. Okay, so first of all, we capture the data in this new variable. So the request post. Remember that we're just sending across the form. So we can then go ahead and now check to see if the form is valid. So because we've got the whole form, we can now use the if comment form is valid. So remember, we put everything into the comment form. So now we can do that. So if it is valid, if the data is all valid, then we can do some things, right? So let's first of all collect all the information and prepare it to save. So we do that. So we get the data and use comment and comment form save. So we collected all the data and we're preparing it to be saved. Now there's some additional data that we want to include. So remember that we also need the user. So let's go ahead and also prepare the user data or the user ID or the user to go into the author. So this is where you need to remember what your model is. So we need data in the author. And it's a foreign key, so it's a mandatory field. We can't have a null field. Post. That's the post it's associated to, the comments. We need it in there. And the parent here, that can be null. That's not a problem. And the content, obviously it's not mandatory, but we can do it. Published, well, that's just going to happen automatically because it's just a date time field. And status is already set to default true. So there's two mandatories that are required, one optional field for data. So that's important that you understand your model and what you're actually importing in. So I prepare the data, prepare it to save. So commit equals false. So we're not actually saving it yet. And then we're going to add some additional data. So the request user, this is the actual user that's currently logged in. So we're going to get their data and match it up to the author. And that's obviously a foreign key. So now we have all the data we need. So we can go ahead and now save it. Okay, so we want to pass some data back. So what we probably want to send back is two things. So let's just, I can put it anywhere you like. So let's just send back two things. So let's send back a result, which is going to have the comment form clean data, the content. So we need to capture the content from the clean data because we've gone through the validation. So this is how we capture the data back, the content data. So result, and then we have request username. So here we're just going to get the username of the user that made the comment, and then we're going to put that into user. So the reason why we're doing that is because then we can utilize it further shortly. So I'll show you that when we get to that, because you're probably asking yourself, well, we can just get the username anyway, so it seems a bit pointless. I think I had a reason for that, so passing that back. So then we can go ahead and just return what we've just set up here. So we're going to return the result, which is going to be the content of the comment. We need that because we want to make we want to actually make a new place for that content. So we can show that we've made the content. And then the user, we're just sending that back to. So here we're going to create a JSON response. So we are going to need to import that into the project. There we go. So there we go. Apologies, I've now lost it. So that's all we need there. So in actual fact, there's not too much Django, not too much more Django that we need to really deal with here. Now it's really most of a front-end exercise. We will come back to this when we add the delete function, because obviously we need to delete that from the database. But that's pretty much all that's needed here. Okay, so for some of you, maybe that's all the information that you need to kind of apply into your own system. You can kind of see the nuts and bolts here of Django. The rest, like I keep saying, is going to be a front-end exercise. So let's head back to the single page, because now we've got some sort of success. So first of all, we add this attribute here, which is essentially the key to where the data is being stored. So the data gets returned, and we can now reference to it via the JSON. We can include whatever we want here. I just didn't call it JSON. So this is how we're going to reference the data that's returned. So you can go ahead and, for example, console log JSON. So that will give you in the console, in your browser, it will give you just an idea of the data that's being returned. So that can be really useful if data isn't being returned which you're expecting. You can kind of see what data is being returned or not. So that again is just a helpful tool to help you kind of diagnose some of the problems that you might have. Okay, so let's remember what's happening next. We've made a comment, the data's been processed and saved, and we've sent back the comment data. So what we want to do now is add a new box so that we can see what the user's just typed in, so the comment they've just made. And then obviously we need to place that in a certain place. So this is where knowledge of JavaScript, here we're using jQuery just to make things a little bit easier and slimming down some of the JavaScript. So this is where that knowledge comes into play here. So I'm going to be making a insert before. So I've got this copied and pasted and ready to go. So you can see what's happening here. I've created a new div and I've got some styling here, etc. And you can see here I've placed the data from the JSON that got returned, the data that got returned, the user information, so I've concatenated here a string with JSON using the plus concatenation tool. And you can see here that we've got down here another concatenation for the results. This is where the comment that the user has made will be placed. So here you can see we've mixed up HTML inside of this JavaScript here, and then we're going to use this jQuery insert before, and then we're going to use this hashtag and then plus placement. Okay. So because we're going to utilize this piece of data for both the comment, the single comment that we're going to make at the bottom, and for the reply to comments, or the comment to a comment, we need to determine where to actually place this div, because we're injecting this div into our page. So we need to know where we're going to place it. So just an easy solution which you can refactor here. So what I'm going to do is set up this variable called placement, and that equals comment form. So let's remember that this is called comment form. So when we make the form for the reply to comments, that's going to be called new comment form. So we're going to capture here whether whether we're going to make a reply or a new comment, sorry, or we're going to make a reply. So here you can see that button equals. So remember that when we press the button, we're going to get the attribute, the value of it, and that equals the form ID too. Remember, so the button value is going to equal the comment form ID, the form ID. So here we're going to determine whether someone is actually making a new comment or whether they're replying. And then we're going to use that information to insert this comment that they've just made in the right place. So here we're just building via this concatenation placement value. We're getting the ID of the item we want to then insert this code before. So that's how we're going to inject this code back into the page. So notice that these backslashes here, this refers to another line. So because I want to use multiple lines here, you need to use the backslash to make multiple lines. There isn't a backslash here because in actual fact, this line's just been, what's the word? This line has been toggled down here, or wrapped, sorry. So this is why it doesn't have a backslash here. But if I were to stretch this out, you can see that it's on one line. Okay, so you can see what's happening there, hopefully. So what we should have now is a system in place where we can probably get this working and making comments. So if you're following the code, you will receive an error. There's just a small thing that you need to change. So where we were using before, we were utilizing the pagination system. Here in line 186, it says comments referring to that. So what we need to do is to type in all comments. I think that then solves that little issue there. Okay, So now we have that. Let's just go ahead and see if we can add a comment. So it doesn't seem to be working, which is absolutely okay. We're not actually logged in. So probably what's happening is that we're not actually sending an ID across. So you can see there it says comment author must be user instance. So that is referring to the fact that we're not actually logged in. So we're not actually sending across a user ID. Remember in the code, we automatically place that in the form, extracting it from Django. So we'll need to actually log in. So let's go back to the post. So let's go ahead and try again. Notice that the your profile image now appears. Press submit, and there we go. So it now pops up. So you can see it says by admin. We can see the post. Obviously, you can restyle this. Well, let's just go ahead. I have actually applied some different styling for this. So just close that. You can see in the code repository the styling. Obviously, you can change it to however you like. So I've just added some styling for that. I'll just overwrite that. So you can see that I've added some styling for the avatar. Changed the height and the width, I think there, and I've added some focus colors, and I'm just overriding some of the bootstrap and the border for the comment add. Oh, wait, that's there. So if we go back in now, it's going to look a little bit like that. So that just adds the styling there. So we can go ahead and create another one. Yep. And what's happening here is we're making a temporary comment almost here. So of course, we can't reload Django at this point. We have to refresh the page. So we can only really with this essentially place a temporary comment and identify where it needs to go. When we actually press refresh, that's when it gets put into place almost. So here's kind of this is obviously the permanent fixture. This is now saved in the database. Okay, so next up we're going to add the delete button. So I just want to show you that next. So again, it would be useful if you've seen the previous tutorial where we generated this. So here we're utilizing MPTT. So we're utilizing all the tools from that. So I think around about here, we we load the MPTT tags first, and then we can start looping over the comments. So we've got the recursive tree here. So essentially, this is where we start looping across or over the different comments in this particular post. And all the data here is referred to as node. Notice that, so node ID, etc., etc. So again, we're just using MPTT here to output what you see. So what you see here is the div where you get the node name, node published date, the content, and essentially if there is a level, then we're going to detect whether the level is less than 3. If it is, it's going to show this button here, reply. So this is how we're protecting, or we're limiting the amount of levels that we have, comment levels. So utilizing node level, checking the node level and making sure it's less than 3. So here's the reply button. So let's now add the delete button. So what we're going to do here after the end if, I just wanted to show you this little bit of code. So we're going to get the node author. Now, if you want to match the node author, remember this is, so we've made a comment, the comment's in the database, it comes out of the database. Remember the author is attached to the comment. So we get the node author, the person who made the comment, and we need to convert that into a string format in order to then make this check to whether it equals the username of the user who's currently logged in. So if the comment that we're looking at matches the user that's logged in, we're going to allow them to actually delete the item. Of course, if there is a match made, then they must have made the comment. So therefore, we're going to show them the delete button. And this time we're going to create a function. So on click, we're going to get the node ID. So that's the individual unique ID that's associated with that particular comment. We need to capture that and forward that over to the function that we need to make. That function is going to be connected obviously to our view. In our view, we're then going to delete the item that begins with this ID, the comment that begins with this ID. Okay, so in this instance, if you move back down to the comment section here, so I'm just going to make a new AJAX request. So we're going to need to send data across, obviously. So underneath this AJAX request here, we're just going to build a new AJAX request. So this is going to be called delete comment. Remember, we're taking in the ID. So we're passing in the ID of the comment. So we can console log that if you want to see it. So here we're going to set up an AJAX again. So again, we're sending to post. And again, we're sending to the same URL. So we're not going to make a new URL here. We're just going to handle it in the view. So how we differentiate this post request to the original post request is that we're going to use an action. We're just going to set up some data called action. It's going to be called delete. So that's how we're going to differentiate that in the view. So here we're going to just take in the node ID, the ID directly that's being inserted, and that's all that we're going to need. So we send off also the CSRF token, and you can see that what we're going to do now is go back into the view, and in our add comment, what we're going to do now is additional check. So we're going to check to see whether the request also action is delete. So let's just set this up. So in the view, we're going to now say if request post. So if request post dot action equals delete, then we're going to do something. And obviously we're going to take the ID from the post. So we're going to take the ID from the post, which is stored in the node ID. That matches up right here, the node ID data. So we want to collect that data and put it into this new variable called ID. And then you can print that to check to see if you've got the right ID if you want. And then what we do is we go into the comment database, or the comment table, sorry, and then we look for the comment that begins with the ID that we need to delete. And all we then do is tell it to be deleted. And then we can return something if we want, remove, and then the ID that we've deleted. So that's what's happening there. So we can then obviously run the else right here. If we want to, we can do it this way. Else we're going to run this, which is obviously collecting the form data and then doing something with it. So that's how we're going to differentiate that. That needs to be indented. Okay, so that's now that in place. So that just provides the differentiation depending on what request is being sent across to the view. Okay, so just before I run this, I'm just going to make some few changes here. So node content, and I'll just change where the HR is. So just some additional styling there. You can play around with this, of course. So now we've got that in place, let's go back to our page. So it should run now. Let's go back. For some reason we've got a strange visual problem. Okay. So now we've got the option to delete. So let's just refresh the page to make sure it's okay. And let's go ahead and now delete. And there we go. So if I refresh the page, they should actually be deleted. Yep, so we don't have any comments. So let's have a look at the code for this. So apologies, scrolling down. At the bottom here, we got delete comments. So what we've done is we've returned the ID. Okay, so what we've done here is we've set up a remove using jQuery. We've taken the ID that's being returned. Remember that's stored in the remove. It was, yeah, and the remove is the ID. Now, if you inspect the page, every time you make a new comment, each comment has an ID. So if we can just find that. Oh, apologies, it won't have an ID unless you refreshed, of course. So that's something you can set up. So you can see that each comment has an ID. So all we're doing, that's IDs associated with that div associated to that whole block. So all we're doing is returning the ID of the comment, and then we're using jQuery to actually delete it from view. So that way we don't actually have to refresh the page. So this is something that I haven't implemented that you could go ahead now and implement. when we make a comment, there's no buttons here, etc. So you could just pass in a few more styling to do that. By passing it back out the user, we can obviously make the connection. So if user equals the user that's logged in, we can have the delete button. So if you apply that there, here, we could actually, when they make, we could also get them to delete at the same time. So that's just something that you can add in. Hopefully you can see the general dynamics here of what's happening in this tutorial. And you've got the core of the logic now that you need to now take this a little bit further and adapt it to your particular situation. Okay, so next up, we need to sort out the replies. So at the moment, we're still using this old form that we're utilizing in the previous incarnation of this. So now we need to just get rid of that and add our new form and connect that up. So if you inspect line 203, here we have the button. When someone clicks on the reply, it opens up a new function called my function, and it passes in the node ID. So that's important. So let's go back into down here below the delete comments. We're adding the new function. So we're going to import or include or capture the ID of the comment that we want to reply to. So we bring that in, and you can see here that we say if the document contains element by ID new comment form, we're going to actually remove. So what we do here first is that when we press reply to a comment, the new form appears. This is the form right here that appears. But if we press reply on a different comment, we want to remove the old form. So this form is called new comment form. So the first thing we do is we check to see if this form exists on our page, and we remove it if it does. So that's the first thing that we do. We get that by ID, new comment form. Okay, so that's what we first do. And then what we got here is get element by ID thumbs, get attribute data value. Okay, so I remember. So there is an element on the page that we use for thumbs. So this was in a previous tutorial. And what we did was we created a value entry whereby we inserted the post ID, because what we're going to need to do here is to actually get the post ID. So we're going to have to capture that manually here and put it into this selection option here. So if you remember in the original form, that's what you're looking at here, the basic form where you can just reply, or sorry, make a new comment, we put the form post ID right here. So that's what we are sending across. Now we don't have the luxury now of actually asking Python Django to do that for us because we're using AJAX. So we need to do that manually. So back down here, what we've done is, if you look in the page, look for the element called thumb, there's an attribute, a data value attribute, which represents the ID, post ID of this post. So we put that into this variable here, we capture that, and we're going to need that when we output, you can see down here when we output the actual form. So then we get the URL. So this is just the avatar URL. We're just getting the just scraping the avatar URL for this particular user so we can use it in the graphics. Okay, so here we're capturing here the ID of the comment that we're making a reply to. So remember, we're passing in the comment ID. So we get that and we put it in this variable. And what we're going to do is we need to know what comment, or sorry, what comment, sorry, it's been a long day, which comment we're making a reply to. So what we want to do then is capture that, and now we know where we want to put this new comment form for the user to make a comment. So we identify the post ID, and then we insert JSON HTML after the end of this ID. So where this div or this element ID is in place, we're going to put this code after it. So this is the form that we're using. So again, what we've done is we manually created a form with everything we need. So we've got the post ID, we've got the ID, so that's the ID that we're replying to. So this is where MPTT comes in, because we're going to tell the database that we're making a reply against the comment that already exists. So here we're going to create a new level of comments for that particular comment. Here we're putting in the URL of the image so we can get the user's image in place, just for a little bit of styling. So the rest is pretty much just the same. You can read through. You'll notice again that we're using the backslash to create individual lines because we're trying to put HTML here inside of JavaScript. So with that in place, let's have a look to see what that looks like. So back on our page now, we can make a reply, and you can see we now have the new form. So this should work, I think. So let's just try and make a reply. There we go. So you can see that the new reply is being placed underneath where it needs to be. So when we press refresh, you can see it's now in place properly too. So we can make a new comment again, and we can obviously reply against that. So the box appears in the right place. Remember, we're using the ID of this post to identify where we need to put this comment form. Press submit, and we now made a new comment. That's going to make a new row. Okay, so you can now see we pretty much have all the functionality in place that I want to show you in this tutorial. Yes, it's a little bit raw. There's a bit of styling that needs to be done. If you have a look at the code repository, it's a little bit more complete in what you're seeing here. What I showed you originally is where we ended. It really is just a bit of styling that's needed. All the functionality that I've shown you is in place here. You just need to connect this button up so it closes it. So basically you just need a bit of jQuery connected to this that's going to remove that block when you press close. I think I do have that in the final version in the repository, but hopefully I've shown you enough now for you to kind of get on and implement within your own system. There is going to be maybe a few questions, so feel free to ask questions. Please study the code before you ask any questions. Happy to answer them if I can. But there we go.